temple and began to reform the abuses found in its courts. He began to show that when the Redeemer came to Zion, it would be to turn away ungodliness from the house of Jacob. The scribes and the chief priests saw not how they might correct his leadership and make peace with him, but how they might destroy him. A desperate attempt, as it always is, against Yeshua Elohim. But they felt compelled to do so, showing the state of their tree. A title for those who want one. Sound tree, good fruit. Poison tree, deadly fruit. This analogy speaks of the quality of the works of those who claim to follow the way of Elohim. In another situation, Yeshua spoke of the quality of those who follow him and what is necessary to do so successfully, and how to detect those who are genuine in doing so. Turn to Matthew, the 7th chapter, the 13th verse. Matthew, the 7th chapter, the 13th verse. Go in through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction. And many there are who go in through it. Well, they go in through it, but where they come out, no one knows. 14, because narrow is the gate and constricted is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. You shall not know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorns, or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree brings forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree brings forth evil fruit, or no fruit at all. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruits, nor can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that does not bring forth good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, by their fruits you shall know them. And some may not be fully exposed until we see their state in the kingdom. Sometimes we won't know their state until we don't see them there. It is foolish to assume that we will know the state of all our brethren from what we see here among us. Much is hidden, and we cannot always see their fruits clearly. Verse 21. Not everyone who says to me, Sovereign, sovereign, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. A lot of people who say that they don't understand how you can say, Lord, Lord, or sovereign, sovereign, and not be sincere. But you can go much farther than that and not be sincere. yet no one else knows but you and the Father. You can become a disciple and hold the money bag, steal from it at will, then turn Yeshua in to the Pharisees and the Roman soldiers for execution with a kiss. You can preach Elohim's word on the Sabbath and turn and preach something else on Sunday, strictly for money, gaining converts on both days. But to what end? Only Elohim knows the fate of these. Years ago, when Al was alive, Al and I went to a couple of funerals of members. Where we found, after we got there, that we had members active among us. And those members had never missed a Sunday with their Sunday churches. As I told Al, only Elohim knows how those stories will end. Know this, we did what we were supposed to do, and pray that they've earned somehow the mercy of Elohim. When I was younger, I played guitar for a gospel quartet. And those guys, if you get my meaning, lived like rock stars. Some of them still do. I won't name them, as I hope they have changed somewhat. But I saw many people baptized from just hearing their music. But only time will tell if it went further than that. But this is what Yeshua spoke of. Notice how he described others in verse 22. Continuing. Many will say to me in that day, Master, Master, did we not prophesy in your name? And through your name throw out demons? Most of us don't even know how to throw out a demon. Didn't even learn that we could until a couple of years ago. And through your name do many wonderful works. And then I will say to them, I never knew you. A sentence that shudders anyone that is thoughtful and versed in this book. Then I will say to them, I never knew you. And more specifically, you never knew me. But see it from Master Yeshua's point of view. He knows our thoughts. He knows our motivations and knows that they are not consistent with our deeds sometimes. Some are doing what they do for gain. Some are doing it for accolades, fame, money, more money, and on and on. The people being converted are fooled. But if sincere, I will accept their conversions if they are sincere, and will lead them to the truth. You, on the other hand, are not. To whom he says, depart from me, those working lawlessness. Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on a rock. And the rain came down. Atlanta. And the floods came. And the winds blew and beat on that house. And it did not fall, for it was founded on a rock. And everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them shall be compared to a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain came down, and the floods came, and the wind blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. And it happened when Yeshua had ended these sayings that the people were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one having authority, which he did, and not as the scribes, who, according to the Bible historians, used to say when they delivered a teaching to the people, our rabbis or our wise men said, or our sages say, this and so. You hear many rabbis and others doing this even to this day, because many teachings are from not the Torah, but the Talmud. And the teachings of these sages and such are not necessarily from the Torah. Those who speak on these things speak on them in the words of Hillel and make use of his name for any authority that can be derived from it. And those who were on the side of Shammai made use of his name. No Talmudic teacher would ever dare venture to say anything of themselves. But the ancient doctors say thus and so. Also, in innumerable instances, might give out from the Talmud, in which one rabbi speaks in the name of another. But Yeshua, Messiah, spoke boldly of himself in his own name, and did not go about to support his own doctrine by the testimony of the elders. He didn't need to do that. Yeshua was come in the name of the Father on his authority. In their frequent criticism of Yeshua, the Pharisees also always questioned the educational background of his teachings. Much as many educated folk do nowadays, attempting to discredit one as a minister for his lack of this world's college degrees or letters. Notice in John, the 7th chapter, the 10th verse. John, the 7th chapter, the 10th verse. But when his brothers had gone up, then he also went up to the feast. The feast? What feast? He said,
Amen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How could you not miss it? Oh, Lord.
They've been missing it for years.
Yes, they have.
Somehow. Not only, but as in secret. 11. Then the Jews, mainly the Pharisees, sought him at the feast. That's a mistake, right? That's a mistake. They say that he didn't keep the feasts.
That's right.
They say.
That's what they say.
Where is he? Verse 12. And there was much murmuring among the crowd concerning him. For some said, he is a good man. Others said, no, but he deceives the crowd. However, no one spoke openly of him. Here's the key. Because of the fear of the Jews or the Pharisees. Now about the middle of the feast, Yeshua went up into the temple and taught. Taught at the temple? Mm-hmm. Temple met on what day? Mm-hmm. In the Sabbath. Mm-hmm. Read the book for yourselves. A lot of what's out there is wrong, and they know it. And they'll goad you into it like they're goading you into this. Nah, I'll shut up about that. Now, about the middle of the feast, Yeshua went up into the temple and taught. Verse 15. And the Jews marveled, saying, how does this man know letters, not being taught? And somehow in the midst of that, they're saying, how does this man know letters, not being taught by us? Verse 16, Yeshua answered them and said, my doctrine is not mine, but his who sent me. Amen. If anyone desires to do his will, he shall know of the doctrine, whether it is of Yahweh Elohim or I speak from myself. He who speaks of himself seeks his own glory. But he who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and no unrighteousness is in him. Again, if the tree is sound, the fruit will be sound as well. There is abounding ignorance of the scriptures in the world today. There is also an abounding belief in this ignorance, often because of its source. Most seminarians teach with theological authority that Enoch, Elijah, and Moses are in heaven to this day. Yet there is not a shred of scriptural proof of any of this. Yet most mainstream teachers and their followers will swear and challenge you in great hostility that these things are true, and will ridicule you if you challenge or dispute them. Yet, what does Elohim say in his word? John, the first chapter, the 18th verse. John, the first chapter, the 18th verse. No one has seen Yahweh at any time. The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father. he has declared him. Now I'll go down to John, the 3rd chapter, the 13th verse. John, the 3rd chapter, the 13th verse. And no one has ascended up to heaven except he who came down from heaven, and the Son of Man who is in heaven. Now, if all of this is true, then where is Enoch? If Enoch was translated, where did he go? Was he immediately taken to heaven? No, because Yeshua himself said, no man has ascended up to heaven but he that came down from heaven, even the Son of Man. We just read that in John 3:13. Here are Yeshua's own words that no man except himself has ascended into heaven. Surely no scholar can doubt the sure word of Elohim. But they do every day in their classrooms. So let's prove it further from the Bible itself. We'll go back to Genesis, the 5th chapter. Genesis, the 5th chapter, the 21st verse. And Enoch lived 65 years and fathered Methuselah. And Enoch walked with Elohim 300 years after he fathered Methuselah. That word Elohim here is H430, those who are studying. He fathered Methuselah, and he fathered sons and daughters. Verse 23, and all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with Elohim, and then he was not, for Elohim took him. A strange phrase, to be sure, he was not. But let's see if it's used anywhere else in the Bible and see how it is used there. This may give us a clue to the intent here. We first find the phrase in the story of Joseph, when his brothers decided to sell him to the Midianites, descendants of Abraham and Keturah. Genesis, the 37th chapter, the 24th verse. Genesis, the 37th chapter, the 24th verse. And they took him and threw him into a pit. And the pit was empty, with no water in it. And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked. And behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels bearing spices and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it? Always thinking of profit first. What profit is it? We should kill our brother and hide his blood. Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother. Now you think about it. And our flesh. And his brothers listened. Obviously, their jealousy and anger outshined the law of Yahweh in their eyes. For note what the law says about selling a man into slavery. Hold your finger here for a second. We'll come back to this. Now turn to Exodus, the 21st chapter, the 16th verse. America, listen. And he that steals a man and sells him, and or he is found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. All that to do about slavery, and it's still with us to this day because it was never settled properly. And wait on, it will be soon. But before I get too far off track, turn to Deuteronomy 24:7. I like the way these numbers come out sometimes on these verses. 24:7. All day teaching. Deuteronomy 24:7. If a man is found stealing a person of his brothers, the sons of Israel, and makes a slave of him or sells him, then that thief shall die, and you shall put away evil from among you. Now, continuing in Genesis, the 37th chapter, you probably had your finger there. Genesis, the 37th chapter, the 28th verse. And men, Midianite traders came by, and they drew up Joseph and took him out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. And Reuben returned to the pit. And behold, note this, Joseph was not in the pit. And he tore his clothes. And he returned to his brothers and said, the child, he is not. And I, where shall I go? And they took Joseph's tunic and killed a kid of the goats and dipped the tunic in the blood. And they sent the tunic reaching to the soles of his feet, and they brought it to their father. And they said, we have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's coat or not? They knew too, but they couldn't say. 33. And he knew it and said, it is my son's tunic, that one of many colors that we heard about so much. They dipped it in blood. All the work that they put into that coat. That's another story for another day. And they said, it is my son's tunic. An evil beast has eaten him. Joseph is without doubt torn in pieces. The same Hebrew phrase is used, ayin, a particle verb of negation or non-existence, meaning no, none, nothing. Yet here, the phrase is used for a person that was on the scene who seemed not to know what became of the subject at some point. This is not to say that Yahweh did not know what happened. Reuben knew what happened to Joseph, but he simply lied to his father concerning Joseph's fate. But we now have an incident making up the meaning of this phrase, he was not. The child is not. The writer of Genesis, presumably Moses, being flesh, could not see where Yahweh took Enoch. Thus, he also used the phrase saying that Enoch was not. Yet Yahweh took his body so as not to have his grave tampered with, just as the Ark of the Covenant has been hidden from profiteers and charlatans. And as Yahweh took the body of Moses, his son, himself. Deuteronomy, 34th chapter, the 4th verse. Deuteronomy, the 34th chapter, the 4th verse. And Yahweh said to him, this is the land which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your seed. I have caused you to see it with your own eyes, but you shall not go over there. And Moses, the servant of Yahweh, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of Yahweh. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. But no man knows of his grave to this day. And as usual, Satan here intervened, but the angels prevented him from doing his evil work. Jude, the 1st chapter, the 9th verse. But Michael, the archangel, when contending with the devil, he argued about the body of Moses. He dared not bring a judgment of blasphemy, but said, yet Yahweh rebuke you. As to this argument or contending about the body of Moses, it appears, according to the ancient texts, that Satan wished to make this place of Moses' burial known to the Israelites in order to tempt them to worship him, which, as we've seen with the Hebrews so many times in the past, this wouldn't have been a difficult task. They seem to look for idols to worship anywhere and everywhere. But Satan was prevented by Michael and vented his rage in desperate blasphemy. Yet in all of this, how can the Bible be expected to contradict itself? It doesn't. But we go off on tangents and believe that it does. Notice what is said here of the faithful of Elohim in the 8th chapter of Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, we'll start at 3. By faith, we understand that the ages were framed by a word of Yahweh, so that the things being seen not to have come into being out of things that appear. By faith, Abel offered to Yahweh a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, by which he obtained witness that he was righteous, Yahweh testifying of his gifts. And by it, he being dead, yet speaks. Verse 5, our focus here. By faith, Enoch was translated so as not to see death, and he was not found, because Yahweh had translated him. That's the key word here, translated. For before his translation, he had this testimony, that he pleased Yahweh. Now, a proper Greek translation of this phrase, along with a proper understanding of the function of Hebrews 11, will clear up a lot of our problems if we are very careful to follow along. In verse 5, by faith Enoch was translated. G, 3346, the Greek word, metatithemi, to move something from one place to another. Then he should not see. Edo, G, 1492. To see. This verb is obsolete in the present. The active tense, for which hooray, G, 3708. To see with perception is used. The tense is derived from the meaning of aidu for two families, one of which has exclusively the meaning of to see, the other that of to know, meaning that Enoch died, but painlessly. He did not perceive it coming on him. It did come on him, though. Death. G, 2288. Thanatos, natural death, and was not found, because Yahweh had translated him. For before his translation, he had this testimony, that he pleased Yahweh. It was fascinating in doing the research in a Greek lexicon, putting this together. The commentary in the lexicon clearly states that Enoch is presently in heaven. This was very, very puzzling to me. The text proved that he wasn't. And how many scholars are still thinking he's in heaven with Moses, with Elijah, and others of our families. Please notice what it says of all those mentioned in Hebrews 13, starting at verse 6. But without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to Yahweh must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. By faith, Noah, having been warned by Yahweh, Elohim, of these things not yet seen, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out into a place which he was afterward going to receive for an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was that he went. By faith, he lived in the land of promise as a stranger, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs of the same promise with him. For he looked for a city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is Elohim. By faith also, Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed, and was delivered of a child when she was past age to do so, because she judged him who had promised to be faithful. Because of this came into being from one, and that of one having died, even as the stars of the sky in multitude, and as innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. Note this. This is the key right here. Verse 13. These all died by way of faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off. And they were persuaded of them and embraced them and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they who say these things declare plainly that they seek a fatherland. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from which they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. But now they stretch forward to a better fatherland, that is a heavenly one. Therefore Elohim is not ashamed to be called their Elohim, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, being tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, and of whom it was said that in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that Yahweh was able to raise him up even from the dead, from where he even received him in a figure. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning the things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and worshipped, leaning upon the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, dying, remembered concerning the exodus of the sons of Israel, and gave orders concerning his bones. By faith, Moses, having been born, was hidden 3 months by his parents, because they saw he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandments. they were not God's commandments.
That's right.
24. Having become great, Moses by faith refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of Yahweh than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a time, esteeming the reproach of Messiah greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as he has seeing him who is invisible. Through faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, which the Egyptians attempted to do so and were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down. After this, they had traveled around them or encompassed them 7 days. By faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe, when she had received the spies with peace. And what more shall we say? For the time would fail to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also David and Samuel the prophets. Was not Ezekiel not only a prophet, but the primary teacher of the school of the prophets? 33. Who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in fight, turned to flight the enemies, the armies of the strangers. Women received their dead raised to life again at the resurrection. And others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection, the first. And others had trials of cruel mockings and scourgings, yes, more of bonds and imprisonments. They were stoned, they were sawed in two, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains and dens and caves of the earth. And having done all this, having obtained a good report through faith, did not receive the promises. For Elohim had provided some better thing for us, that they should not be made perfect without us. Read that again, Ray. For Yahweh had provided some better thing for us, that they should not be made perfect without us. If you have not received the promise, and the Bible says that we all will gain the promise at our resurrection, it is a challenge to be sure, but we must pray for the guidance of the Holy Spirit in learning His word. The scholars themselves are deceived about much of the word of Elohim, with it clearly in their faces, and they twist it even so. And this deception will become more clear as we go deeper into the end times, as many of our scholars and preachers are open to this deception because they trust their scholarship more than they trust the true word of Elohim. As Elohim prunes us and prepares us to produce even greater fruit in the end, let us all continue to pray for the strength and look out for one another as we carefully read and study His word. Don't be disillusioned by the loss of a job, even the loss of loved ones. Anything we lose here, we will gain there. Trusting the helps of the word sometimes works. Might get you a little bit tangled up every once in a while, but in the word itself, it will untangle you somehow and get you to where you're supposed to be. For the times only promise to get worse, and the confusion found in some also will get worse. His word will only become more compelling as Satan's time winds down and he becomes more desperate to confuse us and cause us to fall from grace, the grace of Elohim. Let us remain strong and bind closer to His word in obedience. And we will close out with 1 Peter, the first chapter, the 22nd verse. 1 Peter 1, 22. Purifying your souls in the obedience of the truth through the Spirit to unfeigned love of the brothers. No fake stuff here. Love one another fervently out of a pure heart, having been born anew, not again anew, not of corruptible seed, but of incorruptible seed, through the word of Elohim, and abiding forever. For all flesh is as grass, and all the glory of men as the flower of the grass. The grass withers, and its flower falls out, but the word of the sovereign endures forever. And this is the word preached as gospel to you. Hold to His word in obedience, that your tree may remain sound and your fruit be pure unto His return. Any questions? No questions? There we go. All rise.